Uh, where did I grow up? Actually, I was born in Chicago, um, and let me think. Ended up living though for a while in Hawaii. Actually, uh, grade school or preschool was in Hawaii on Oahu, and then uh, I came back and lived in Los Angeles, probably around kindergarten time. And my mother moved us into a place across the street from Denker Playground on 36th and Denker. The neighborhood, at the time, you're a kid, you don't realize it, but when you grow up and become a teenager, you realize neighborhoods sometimes have these colorful, romantic names. That neighborhood around Denker Playground was called Dodge City. For what it's worth, it's kind of colorful. It might imply some action and adventure from that neighborhood. And then I went to Maryknoll, all Japanese American Catholic school here in Little Tokyo, and my parents moved to Rampart Boulevard, right off the Hollywood freeway, and in an area I didn't know at the time, but that neighborhood was called, it's right in the border, in the cross section of a neighborhood referred to as Temple, and just west of that, also referred to as J Flats. And it was from there that I went to public school, Virgil Junior High School, and then on to Belmont. Well, it was funny because having gone 6 years to Maryknoll, all Japanese, parochial school taught by very strict nuns, and we wore uniforms, and there was a lot of structure. My introduction to public school was like crazy. I thought, really, my first day in public school, I thought this must be what the world's going to be like, as the world ends. Like, this must be what the end of the world is going to look like. It's just crazy mayhem and chaos. No discipline, no structure, none of that, and certainly not all Japanese. So my introduction to public school was shocking, to say the least, but also it was like fun. It was so new and exciting that I just kind of got caught up in the fun, the difference between that and the structured, disciplined Maryknoll environment that I came from. And because of my Maryknoll background, academically, I was really strong in junior high school. I did really well. I was well prepared for school, actually more than prepared. So a lot of the classes, I used to think, God, we're in the 7th grade and I learned this stuff in the 3rd grade kind of thing. So maybe that fed into the fact that I got a little bored in school, but I was just caught up in the excitement of this public school environment that was so different from Maryknoll. And I would see, certainly the straight A elements and the very civil students, and then, but I was just intrigued by the wildness and the adventure and the fun that some of the other students seemed to be having in school, and I kind of got caught up in that mentality. It appealed to me, and so I started to get to know some of the characters, and that was my introduction into neighborhoods, street life, something outside of the mainstream that I had been in for so long, for as long as you can be when you're like, 14 years old, something like that. But it was a shock, and it was my introduction into this new world, and I got caught up in it. I enjoyed it, and I met characters that I couldn't believe existed. Other Japanese Americans that were not only smart, but they tended to have a whole gangster element going on with them, and there was excitement, and there was this ethnic mix in this inner city middle school, and so I was meeting and running with blacks and Chicanos and other Asians and whites, and just the diversity was fun and exciting. I had different elements of friends. I mean, I had friends because I started out as a really good student and a straight, square kind of guy. And then the more I started running with my wilder friends, the more I gravitated into their lifestyle. So it was everything from how we walked, how we dressed, how we spoke, and how we acted. And I got caught up in that, and probably ended up, I ran probably mostly with blacks in junior high, and that carried on into high school and actually even into the service, running with minorities. And I was introduced into the street life. It was then that I was told, hey man, you're one of us. You live in Temple or you live in J Flats. And the historical significance of that would be brought up, and the whole street lifestyle of mischief and adventure was exciting and new to me. I met other JAs, but then I remember Atz Sasaki. He was, I wondered who this guy was, you know, that all the brothers and every group seemed to respect this guy. You know, he got along, he could mix through color lines, whether it was white or the Mexicans or the blacks, or he got respect from everybody. And he was a wild guy. This guy, we were in junior high school, and he was having like poker games at his house for hundreds of dollars, you know, and he was like well known by all the gangsters in the neighborhood and everything. He was a wild guy, and I was intrigued by him, and somehow we became friends, and I was he kind of like adopted me like his younger brother. And he probably had the largest, as an individual, the largest single influence on me than any other person during my junior high and high school years, in terms of like introducing me to that lifestyle, a whole different way of living and looking at life. And that included everything from running the streets, doing the gangster thing, as well as this whole concept of Bushido. He's the one that introduced me to Hollywood Judo Dojo. And I went to Hollywood Judo Dojo. I mean, with Atz, he introduced me to fishing. I caught my first bluegill at Echo Park Lake with Atz, caught my first yellowtail and my first tuna with Atz. So there are a lot of firsts with Atz, just like the first time I was in the back seat of a police car was with Atz. So there were a lot of firsts with Atz, but it was an accelerated, fun learning experience. And we just lost Atz just recently, a few months ago. He passed away, but it's a reminder that with the passing of like Atz, Victor Shibata, you know, that there are fewer and fewer of us left around that can talk story about those days in real time. I'm trying to think. What happened was there was a party actually in the neighborhood, and Atz was this character, bigger than life character, and we had this neighborhood party, and at that time we were friends. We were kind of breaking tradition, and some of us from J Flats were running around with guys from the West Side, and we were at this dance party, and a fight broke out. And I remember that this was at the Hollywood Community Center, and I remember Atz, we realized somebody had gotten jumped outside, so Atz and I ran outside, never thinking that the others, our friends, didn't know what was happening. And so we ran outside, and I realized there's only two of us. We didn't tell our friends that we're running outside. And Otz sees that one of our friends had been jumped and beaten up pretty badly, actually. And so Otz, before I could tell him, hey, Otz, there's only two of us. You got to wait till everyone else comes out. He just started yelling, you know, I'm Otz from J Flats, you know, fall out. And so he calls out, and like 30 guys charge us, right? They went from beating up this other guy, and they start charging us. And Otz was yelling, and there's not enough time and all this urgency for him, you know, for us to talk a lot of story. And I wanted to split, but you just don't do that, you know. If Otz was going to run, then I would run. But if he's going to hold his ground, then I had to do the same. But as luck would have it, and luck played into a lot of my history, cops rolled up on us. Just squad cars just rolled up on us as this was happening. Apparently a neighbor, somebody had called in a disturbance. And so just as this group from the east side started to, actually they weren't from the east side, they were from Compton or Watts. I think they were the farmers. And this had nothing to do with agriculture, but they were a group called the farmers. And the cops rolled up on us, and because we were closest to the driveway in the street, they rolled right up on Otz and me as the others were approaching us. And they just, you know, assumed the position kind of thing, you know, that we were used to. They handcuffed us to the fence of Hollywood Community Center. Otz and I are handcuffed to the fence. First time, that was another first. First time in handcuffs was with Otz. And then I start telling the cops to get us out of there, take us to jail. I figured it would be safer in jail than where we were, right? And so it actually, in retrospect, was really comical because in this case, the cops rescued us. And to get back to this, it was first time in handcuffs was with Otz. They put us in the police car, took us to the police station. I was so glad to be in the back seat of a car. You know, and they took us in. Where did they take us to? Hollywood Station or something like that. Kept us for a few hours, but we really weren't guilty of anything. If anything, we were going to be guilty of a serious ass whooping is what was going to happen. But it made for a great story later that, you know, in this case, the cops rescued us, and they didn't even know it. So that was my first time in cuffs and first time in a backseat of a police car. And oddly enough, it was a welcome experience at the time. And so it wasn't unusual for any of us to have gone to maybe 2, 3, and some others went to multiple high schools. And that's how you networked, actually. That's how you met people. That's how I met Victor and Gary and Dave and Lawrence and the whole group from the West Side when I was going to LA high school. I met them, and we went from them approaching me very unsociably to us becoming friends and forming. We became the core group that formed the Ministers back in the day.
So how did you meet?
Like many, I had been bouncing from high school to high school, and in this case, I was going to LA high school. And I lasted 3 days at LA high school. And each day was an adventure, But this was one of the days of the adventures. I was from J Flats, and there was another fella from Temple that he and I ended up going to LA high school at the same time. And so we decided we'd come and go to school together. You know, however, I don't even remember how we did that. I don't know whether we caught buses or hitchhiked or whatever, but we came and went together to LA high school. This big brother, he played varsity football for Belmont, so he was like 6'3", 230 pounds, which is huge by any standards. And So I was coming out of LA High School, right at the front on Olympic Boulevard, and I think I was waiting for him, and I was on the front steps of Marshall, and I saw this group of hard-looking dudes walking towards me. And you know how you get this sense of doom, right? And I was by myself, and these hard-looking dudes walked right up to me, and they were led by Gary Asamura, and Victor was there, and the others. And Gary came up to me and said, "Give me a dime," which is pretty much a signature move back in that day, because it was like if you gave the dime, you were a punk. If you didn't give the dime, then it's like you challenged them. So it was a no-win situation. In my case, I probably didn't even have a dime, so I couldn't, I just had to act the way it played out. And even if I had the dime, I couldn't give it to him. It would have like been a curse, you know, a jacket I had to wear the rest of the time I was out there. So, and I said, no, I can't do that. So when I told him I couldn't give him a dime, it was like almost like me coming back at them with a challenge. So their next move was theirs, which would not have been good for me, okay? Especially with Gary Asamura in the forefront there. And so I'm ready to figure if I was going to be vertical in the next 15 minutes, because I figured this is going to be really bad. And as luck would have it again, Ramsey, this black dude, comes strolling out the front of the school. Because like I said, we were coming and going to LA High School together, and he came right up to me and said, "Hey Art, what's up?" Right? And it put a chill on everything, because all of us were typical Asians, right? Like 5'3", 5'4", and then the 6'3" dude comes up, right? And is obviously with me, so it put a chill on everything. But I think because of the way the situation was handled, each time after that, subsequent to that, whenever I saw these guys from the West Side, instead of mad dogging me and giving me hard looks, they would acknowledge me. So it's one of those street respect things, because I didn't give them a dime kind of thing, and just the way the situation was handled. And over a short period of time, we actually would engage and start talking, and then we became friends. And oddly enough, we went from this potentially terrible beginning to fast, firm friends, you know, lifelong friends. But at the time, we ended up, we founded during high school, probably that summer, ended up all getting together and forming the Ministers. I joined the service like many from my time that chose to live the lifestyle that I did. It was not unusual, and in my case, it was specifically what happened, and that is living a life on the streets and getting in and out of trouble. Like, we had a pretty serious incident in the summer of 1962 that involved some shooting and some violence, kind of over the top for the period. Nowadays, it wouldn't even make news, or it would be an incidental thing, but it was big, very big when it happened with us. And I was lucky because, once again, luck played into it. My uncle, Stan Uno, happened to be the first Japanese-American police in the United States. So he was the first Japanese-American, and he heard that I had been involved in this incident. And about 4 of us got busted for it. And he came to me. He was really upset. But we always had a good relationship. Anyway, my uncle said, look, if you'll get out of town, I'll take care of this for you. And so I I don't want to say what the charges were, but it was very, very serious. And so I said, okay, I'll get out of town. So I went to the recruiting office. I think it was down there by on Pico, not far from LA High School. And then I looked up on the wall, and there was Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and I had no sense of where to go, what to do. So all I did was I looked at the posters, and I said, oh, wow, Air Force, they got the coolest uniforms. So I joined the Air Force. That was my motivation for joining the Air Force, because they had the coolest uniforms. And went to the Air Force, which started a whole chapter in my life of suddenly not being around other JAs and other minorities, nor around an environment where I always had friends and backup. And when you join the service, you're kind of out there. You're on your own, and you're shipped out of state, and your whole world changes. Went to boot camp in Texas, San Antonio, Lackland Air Force Base, and then got shipped off to Shepherd Air Force Base in Texas, right at the Texas-Oklahoma border, what they call the Panhandle. And it was my exposure to the South, and I hated the South, everything that it stood for, and the social element there, on base, off base. I saw segregation in not so subtle terms, because indeed I was in the South. I saw a whole different lifestyle, and I hated everything about being stationed where I was, and so I volunteered for Vietnam. Vietnam was just a whisper, kind of, about problems in this other place in the world, and all I knew was I think it's somewhere out in the Pacific, but I couldn't point to it on a map. Didn't know anything about it, but it was just making little ripples of news. I went to Shepherd Air Force Base in 62. By 1964, 2 years later, all I wanted to do was get out of Texas. So I went to personnel, volunteered for Vietnam. First choice, just send me to Vietnam. I don't know where it is. I don't know what's going on there, but it's got to be better than Texas. So I volunteered for Vietnam, and orders came down shortly thereafter. And instead of Vietnam, I got orders to ship off to Okinawa, of all places. And I was the happiest guy on earth. And everyone in the squadron was saying, how did you pull that off, right? Nobody gets stationed in Okinawa from here, right? And so I was just happy, that I was getting out of Texas. About a month later, personnel called me, said my orders had been changed. So I thought, okay, well, now that dream's over. I'm going to Vietnam. And my orders indeed had been changed. They got changed from Okinawa to Tokyo, Japan. So I ended up, of all things, being stationed at Tachikawa Air Force Base in Tokyo, Japan. And I was in Japan from 64 to 67, 3 years, because I enjoyed being overseas so much that I extended a year. So instead of doing 4 years in the service, I did 5 years. But it was during that time that I was at Tachikawa, Japan, that I got involved in some other special training, and which led to an assignment, what they call TDY, temporary duty, and was sent to Da Nang Air Force Base in Vietnam. I was still permanently stationed in Japan, but I was sent for a few weeks, temporary duty to Vietnam. If you saw Full Metal Jacket, that was a pretty accurate depiction of boot camp. And like Full Metal Jacket, every group that goes through boot camp has some doofus like that guy. What do they call him? Gomer or something that couldn't do anything right, and every group that goes through boot camp has one of those. We had a fella, and his name was Gunther. He couldn't do a push-up. He couldn't climb a rope. He couldn't learn how to march nor shoot a rifle. It was interesting to just be put into this kind of situation and see all these different characters, these people from different parts of the country, but you're all experiencing and going through the same thing. And I remember there was another Japanese guy, Japanese American guy, I'm assuming he was Sansei. And so my inclination was some way, somehow to work my way towards him and kind of bond, right, another Asian. And a few days into boot camp, there was a commotion off in the corner of the barracks, and curious being that I am, I went over there to see what was happening, and they had this guy cornered, and they were like bullying him, and they were taunting him and ridiculing him. And my first instinct is, oh man, it's another Japanese American, I should help this guy. So that was my intent, was to help him. But as I got closer and closer to the situation, I could see that they were calling him, these were all white guys, and they were calling him like a Jap and a Chink and Ching Chong Chinaman, all the terms that we've all heard. And so right away I thought, well, let me go help this guy. We'll both get jumped by everybody, but you know, I can't leave him here by himself. And so as I got closer to it with the right intentions of helping this guy, I started listening to what he was saying. And he was saying, but no, I'm just like you. My girlfriend is French, and we're just like you. And I was so disgusted that he didn't hold his ground, nor express any pride in being Asian American himself, and that he was trying to convince them that he was one of them, that I went from wanting to be with him and protect him and back him up and go through what he was going through, at least together. But as soon as I saw how he was acting, I walked into the middle of this situation and just hit him. So my enemy went from like these guys taunting him to it just turned on me when I saw how he was acting, and he became more despised. I held him in more contempt than I held the white dudes that were jumping on him, just because he wasn't standing up for himself. And so the irony is striking, you know, that here we are, the only two Asians there, and I'm thinking I'm going to bond with him, another Asian brother, and end up, he's the first guy I hit in boot camp. So it's life is funny that way.
Did you guys ever talk after that?
No, I wouldn't have anything to do with him. I wouldn't have anything to do with him.
How did the white guys around react?
It's funny because my actions stunned, I guess, everybody. But you got to remember, I came from the streets of LA, so doing something like that wasn't that uncommon. So I never thought I did anything like uncommon. But all these other white guys, it's like I became their hero. Like, who's this little dude that came over here and did this, right? And another funny part of that was I had never traveled before, other than going from Hawaii to LA, that kind of thing as a kid. But as a grown person, I hadn't traveled before. And so I didn't have anything to travel with. So when I got inducted or joined the service, the only bag I had was my judo bag. And it was a little small bag, which I just found actually not long ago. And it's got a little illustration of a guy throwing another, and it just says judo and something like that. Well, the white guys in boot camp saw that bag. And you have to remember, like in 1962, nobody knew what judo or karate or anything was. So they thought I was just like, you know, weapon, a walking weapon, some deadly kind of guy, right? And so I played off that. And then when they saw me actually hit another guy, to answer your question, all these white guys said, hey, this guy is cool, right? And they were very good to me and never bothered me. And actually, it was odd because they wanted to be my friend. And so it helped a lot with the rest of boot camp.
Did you ever hear them call other people Chink or Jap after that?
No, because we were the only two there. And I think if they had the inclination to do it with me also, when they saw what happened, it was funny because they all kind of wanted to be my friend. And so it went from that kind of taunting to almost like a respect. And it was funny because indeed, they wanted to be friends. You know, when they got cookies from home, you know, they'd ask me if I wanted a cookie or something like that. And they actually went out of their way to be cool with me.
Do you know if they kept taunting that guy, the other guy?
I don't know. I didn't keep track of that. But then in boot camp, you're only there, in our case, for 8 weeks, and then you disperse. So whatever happened to him, where he got stationed, what happened to him, I really couldn't care less because I so did not respect this guy. At the end of boot camp, all of us went pretty much separate ways. We all got assigned to different places. Well, I remember when I got there, I wasn't there very long, and I heard some noise. But in the military, you kind of get used to that. You especially in military, like an Air Force base, you're used to the sound of a lot of machinery and jets and propellers, and but there were some explosions, which sometimes you'll hear on a military base, not too much on an Air Force base, but it could be a training, part of training, where you'd hear gunfire, explosions. And I remember hearing some explosions. I wasn't there long, and I said, "What was that?" I said, "Oh, you'll get used to it. It's incoming." And I realized, oh, I'm not at Tachikawa, Japan anymore. This guy's talking about us getting mortared, and that I'd get used to it, right? So I realized, okay, looks like we're in a war zone. Because I had met and interacted with a lot of guys while I was in Japan with other GIs from all branches, Marines, Air Force, Army, Navy. I had met a lot of other GIs who had been stationed in Japan or were currently stationed in Japan and just at Tachikawa for R&R. And so I met a lot of them, and I met some messed up people, man. I met some guys that came there, and they, like this one guy, he was there with a friend. They were there on R&R, and this one guy was almost incoherent. I said, "What's wrong with this dude, man?" He said, "Man, this guy's in Vietnam, man." He said he had like what would you call it, a necklace made up of body parts from Viet Cong he had killed, and he had strung up ears and different body parts on the string and had it around his neck and stuff. Certainly he didn't have it at Tachikawa, but that was as they described what he had gone through and what he had evolved or devolved into as a human being. I started thinking differently about the war. When you grow up, you see John Wayne movies, you see like the good guys are always winning. And when you're overseas in wartime, for example, Armed Forces Radio and Television Network or Services, AFRTS, I think they called it. Just like we have traffic reports here, overseas we got body counts. So what would happen was several times a day, they'd broadcast over the radio something like 212 Viet Cong killed, 4 U.S. servicemen killed, 2 injured. And when you think, well, 212 and then 4 U.S., said, with that kind of math, we must be kicking ass over there. And it wasn't until later that you realize when you talk to real-time guys that were there, and then you actually end up there, that it was all bullshit, that body counts like that were just a way of trying to keep the morale up and to keep the initiative going. But I probably saw more darkness out of Vietnam while I was in Japan than I actually did in Vietnam. I volunteered for hospital duty because we often got some of the most severely wounded in Vietnam. come to our hospital at Tachikawa. And they asked for volunteers to help in the hospital, so I volunteered. And I remember walking down the ward, beds on both sides, and I walked down the middle aisle. My first day, I didn't know what to do, so I walked down the middle aisle. I got about 6 beds down, and I turned around and I walked out of the hallway, out of the hospital area, walked around, leaned up against the wall, and I was almost sick. I thought I was a tough guy, and I thought nothing could shock me. But after walking down and seeing guys my age, they say what the average Vietnam veteran was 19. I would say probably in the range from 19 to 21, 22, certainly. And so I'm seeing these guys my age and all. And like I said, I walked just 6 beds down before I turned around and walked out and had to regroup. Because you see guys your age and, with missing limbs and burns and scars where their life will never, ever, ever be the same. You see people with missing limbs, like I said, and holes in them that you could see through. It's hard to imagine, but you would see those kind of wounds, and I don't know, it was pretty traumatic. I saw that not in Vietnam, but in Japan, of all places. What was happening there, when I talked to other vets, like Mike and Nick, and others who had been there, almost without exception, I was there before them, and actually had even come and gone before they were even in uniform, before they even joined the service. So the experience that I saw there was different from what they saw. When I was there, I remember I came home on leave once, and I had no idea. When you go overseas and you go to a war zone, they call it being in country. And when you're over there, they also called, when you come back home, right? They have different terms for it. And so when I came back to the United States from Japan, and I got a chance to watch the news, is really when I saw how the United States, or perhaps the rest of the world, perceived what was happening overseas and in Vietnam. In the military, we had no idea. We had no idea because we live in a small, very controlled environment where even the information, like the body counts and all that we were getting, wasn't coming from an outside source. This was military radio we were getting it from. And when I came home, and you would watch the 6 o'clock news, and you would see all of a sudden the tide turning. And I had no idea that there was dissension about the war. I had no idea that on a larger scale, that the whole Vietnam War had become as international as it was, and how students were becoming more and more vocal and knowledgeable and questioning things about the war. These were things when you're in uniform and you're in country or overseas, you don't realize is going on. Just like when I came home, I would catch up with TV and say, wow, I didn't know, that I think what was one of the programs that I never knew existed, I Spy, Wild Wild West, and things like that. So all of these things, the world goes on, and you don't even realize it when you're overseas. And so overseas, we had no idea that we were involved in a very political and rapidly becoming an unpopular war. I came back not realizing how unpopular the war was, and the mentality was just come back, blend back into the civilian sector, and like many from my generation, never looked back. I never looked back. I gave away good stuff. Later I was saying, man, I gave my cousin my overcoat, and I gave so-and-so my duffel bag and stuff, you know, all these very cool, well-made military gear, but it had no meaning to us anymore. We'd done our thing and just kind of quietly wanted to slip back into the mainstream. In that respect, I was more fortunate than those that followed me, because as the war got even more unpopular, as they came back, not only did people not cheer and applaud them and give them parades and offer them their seats, they were spit on in airports and all, and called baby killers. And this is the type of thing that was just starting to happen when I got out, and probably is the main reason why veterans from my era are very unlike veterans from today. I know guys that are on active duty, not even on active duty anymore, that proudly wear their military memorabilia and their gear. And we all put ours away, you know, deep into the closets, if not thrown away or given to Goodwill. Well, I think it kind of boils down in a nutshell to what's sometimes referred to as a perfect storm, right? All the elements coming together at the same time to make what they refer to sometimes as the perfect storm. My friends and I had had just all come out of either institutions like jail or prison or the military, very close to the same time. So we were all from the ministers together. We were all very close, and we naturally gravitated towards each other again. And the same core group, I remember we went to Nisei Week Carnival. Back in the day, it was really still very big and popular. And we were standing around the carnival, and I saw some hard young dudes come up and talk to some of my friends. And as they walked away, I saw that they had Ministers 3 on their jackets, on the back of their jackets. I never knew there was a Ministers 2 after we had left. And so I was talking to the guys, and they were saying, yeah, man, these some hard young dudes. But instead of us like being into more mischief and violence, they were more into drugs. And so we kind of tuned in on that. And when I talk about perfect storm, we would have actually preferred that they emulate our lifestyle, but this drug culture that they were into was killing them. So we kind of collectively at the same time decided, well, maybe because we're the only ones, we're the OGs that they respect, maybe we can work with these young guys. And that concept was the founding of the Yellow Brotherhood. At the same time, my mother, Amy Uno Ishii, was working closely with her brother up in San Francisco, Edison Uno. And they were collaborating a lot on the education of trying to get the history of the internment camps, the concentration camps, into school books and regiment and more public forums. And so independent of us, they were very active. And so when we talk about a perfect storm, there were those kind of elements all coming together, which I think as they became closer and closer together in terms of meetings, community involvement, spreading knowledge and networking, it was slowly evolving into what later became the Asian American movement, the early seeds of activism. It's affected the rest of my life in so many ways. Just weeks ago, I was still involved with Yellow Brotherhood young brother. I still think this guy's just in Dorsey High School or a year out of Dorsey. He's 60 years old. And I picked him up at the Greyhound station 2 weeks ago and personally took him to ADAP for rehab. So it's not a phase that I went through. Here I am. This was, let's say, if we go back to 1970, and now we're at 2014, and I'm still working with Yellow Brotherhood type cases. We worked for the past 5, 6, 7 years on the Ronnie Nakashima case, a Yellow Brotherhood kid. I call him a kid, and he's 60 years old. And we just got him out of prison after being incarcerated for 37 years. So this, it instilled in many of us this sensitivity, not only to ourselves and how well we do in life and a selfish way of looking at it, but looking at things in a bigger picture, how to better serve our community, how to help other people in our community. And so it was the beginning, and I hope it never ends, this feeling of participation and activism and support for each other.
Eat! Step. Great job. Good job. Good. I'll bet you can't reach me. Eat! 1, 2.
Oh, good. Sit.
Take straight steps.
Oh, good. See, you can reach me, Zoe. Ready?
Sit.
Remember, step, step, punch. Ready?
I'm over here.
Eat! Step, step. Good job. You reached me. Very good. I don't trust that. Eat!